This is Nicole Wilson, and this is the Orlando Real Podcast.
I just had an interview with Nicole Wilson. She's the sitting commissioner for District 1. We talked a lot about development and affordable housing and density and a lot of things that affect so much of us living here in Orlando. If you think that your vote doesn't actually matter, she's got an amazing story around voting and election night here locally as well. I hope you enjoy the interview. Nicole, welcome.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
Oh my gosh. So talk to us about, what does a commissioner do?
Oh, I love that. It's like the broadest of all questions because we do so many different things.
Yeah.
So your county commissioner is largely in charge of a budget that oversees everything from the stop sign at the end of your street to the water quality that comes out of your faucet in the morning if you're county utilities, to the overall park structure in the county. But we are in charge of the budget for our constitutional officers. So that includes the sheriff's office, the prosecutor's office, the entire court system. Those are all budgets that fall under the county budget. So we have a $7.8 billion budget that we oversee. Just a little one. And we balance it every single year.
That's
and
awesome.
we try really hard. The millage rate hasn't changed since I've been in office. We try really hard to make sure that we're keeping that stability as part of the basis of everything, because then you see good economic and social growth.
That's awesome. So I feel like, is it required that we balance the budget?
It is. That's a statutory requirement.
I feel like there's so many other, you hear like news of like California, a bunch of other places that are like in huge deficit, but we don't have that here.
No, well, we don't have it in the county. And I mean, we can bond, right? So if there's a project that we can't afford cash on hand, but we know it's going to be a value and that we are able to utilize that in order to bond, that's a tool that local governments use. So, we do that. There's been, great opportunity there because we have capital improvements that we have to invest in. And sometimes that's things like, we have a firefighter training facility that we're going to have in Orange County that should probably be the premier one across the state.
Yeah, that's going to be cool.
Yeah.
We got to cover that.
Yeah. And it was like one of those things where we look at how do we retain these great professionals, these young people who want to serve the community. We train them here in Orange County and then they leave to go to a different department. And so the idea is if we have the premier training department and we really shore up the benefits and the salary, we're going to be able to retain those folks for their entire career.
So good. Well, before we get too into that, because I want to dive right into like civil servants and all that kind of stuff in a minute, but for people that maybe don't know, like not a lot of people are from Orlando or understand Orange County. And so like I'm from Michigan originally. We had like, we had like county government, but it was really more like municipalities, townships, cities, they did their own thing. Orange County set up a little bit different. You've got the commissioners, but then the mayor, and then we have two mayors because you got the city. Can you unpack what that even is for us?
I'm going to zoom out just a little further.
Let's do it.
So in the state of Florida, under the Florida Constitution, there are charter and non-charter counties. Charter counties, there's 20 of them in the 60s, however many counties there are statewide. Mm-hmm. What that provides for a charter county is actually a local, like a mini constitution. Our charter is our little mini constitution.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's a really cool thing because we're very much self-governed. Now, within Orange County, we also have 13 municipalities. So now, we're talking Winter Garden. In my district alone, I have Winter Garden, Windermere, and Oakland.
Wow.
I used to also have a COE, and then during redistricting, a COE was put wholly into District 2.
Wow.
So, and we coordinate through joint planning with those municipalities, but we have 6 commissioners and a mayor, and we by charter, we have a strong mayor form of government. And what that means is our mayor sort of acts as the chief officer of the board. So oftentimes he is the spokesperson. Ceremonial duties largely fall to him. But when we vote, he's one vote. We each have one vote. So even though I'm a district commissioner, my district is only one vote on a board. So it can be, to me, there are many opinions about different forms of county government, and I can see the benefits and some of the downfalls to that. And I love having district-specific representation. I think that's really important because you know your own neighborhoods and their concerns. But I also think that sometimes it's hard to not really be able to defer to a district-specific commissioner if they have something in particular they need.
But you're over the District 1 currently, and you're running for re-election. This is coming
I
up very soon. We're going to get into the story.
21 days.
20, it's coming up quick. But you actually get to control all of the county or have a vote for the entire county,
for
right? So,
anything that happens.
and there's so much going on here. And like one of the things I'd love to talk about is this whole like annexation going on. I find it fascinating because most people don't even know what they hear about it, and it's a very fleeting thought, but it affects all of us that live here.
Yes.
Can you explain what annexation is and what's currently going on?
It is very interesting, and I think it's something that even District 1 residents, I'm so glad that we're talking about it, that you're interested in it, because it tells me that it will hopefully be a topic that people will talk about.
Yeah.
So right now, the Charter Review Committee for Orange County, which is an appointed committee, and actually Erica was my appointee, one of them, they actually review citizen petitions for things that have come up that have been a concern.
Yeah.
So one of those concerns that came forward to the Charter Review Commission was about growth patterns in the rural areas of Orange County. What we know, and this is not a debatable thing, right? We know it's expensive to allow sprawl because it requires water infrastructure, it requires road infrastructure, but it also requires park space and all the other sort of intangible schools and things that we know cost money.
Yeah.
And so really being careful about how we grow into the future, knowing that we've urbanized very quickly in Orange County. Orange County's put in a lot of work and thought to it.
Sure.
And Vision 2050, which is the update to Orange County's comprehensive plan, has actually been in progress, being worked on for the last 4 years. Yeah. That's right. And, 18 community meetings, I think, in District 1 alone on this topic. And so these growth patterns are something that they need to be thoughtful. They need to consider the existing community. And so if that's a rural community, how's it going to fit with that? Yeah. If it's a suburban community, how's it going to fit with that? If it's a hamlet or a smaller village community, how's it going to fit with that? These are all things that should be kind of determined as we develop. I think as somebody whose background's in environmental law and environmental concerns, that we also need to look at our overall resources and our natural resources, and can we sustain the type of development that we've had the patterns of over the last 50 years, 70 years. And so when the Charter Review Commission began seriously discussing the rural boundary and the annexation issue, the state legislature actually passed a law very specifically targeting Orange County that preempted a appointed Charter Review Commission from putting a ballot measure on the ballot. And so this preemption was very specifically tailored to Orange County's efforts. Now, we're not the first county that's looked into rural protection. Seminole County has an effective rural boundary. It happens in a lot of areas that want to protect their grazing lands and rural lands.
This episode of the Orlando Real Podcast is brought to you by the Posick Group, my real estate team here in Orlando. We have over 1,200 five-star reviews over on Google. And if you're looking to sell or buy a house anywhere in Central Florida, we want to be your real estate resource of choice. So make sure you reach out at theorlandoreal.com/real. And like Osceola County is like, I remember when I first moved here, it was like 75% rural or something. It was like a massive area. So they had a lot of growth. So explain the boundaries, the whole rural boundaries, and what does that actually mean for like me or like somebody living here?
Right. Well, the map that was actually used, that it's going to be sort of the presentation for the charter amendment that's going to be on your November ballot.
Yep.
Is based on our urban service area. So Orange County has had a boundary for urban services that's been on the books for years and years and years and years. And what that means is that everything within that urban service area gets urban services. You get county water. You don't have to get a septic tank because we're going to take your dirty water.
Thank God.
Right? And so you are already contemplated in the investment of urban services. Everything outside the urban service area is something that we should say, is that intended to be, should that be, is the characteristics right now rural? And if it is rural and it's outside the urban service area, then it should be a higher threshold than just a whim of a developer to come in and maybe change that.
So the idea would be like, hey, because if we have to keep paying for sprawl, then maybe our taxes go up. Is that it?
Well, everything, right? So for those people who, reach out about being stuck in traffic, or, they have, concerns about how far away their closest fire station is, those are all things that are impacted by urbanization in a non-sustainable pattern.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, it's our tax base to some extent, because we don't have an income tax, is land based, right?
Sure,
so we've
taxes.
got the land base, and it's been very stable. We have a tax pool that comes, of course, from our tourist taxes. We don't get to use those for infrastructure. We have impact fees that we take specifically from impacts from development. So each development, every time that something is built, a warehouse, a house, whatever it is, there are impact fees, and depending on what that is, different amounts go into different buckets. But it all adds up to not being enough. sometimes if it's really far away.
Okay.
Right? Because even the impact fees only really go to impact sort of this surrounding area, right?
Couldn't you just charge more on impact fees for hey, fine, if you want to be in the rural area, then we get to charge you more. You can do it, but it just costs you more.
I love that idea. But we had a really hard time even updating the impact fees. So they had been, I got into office in 2020. I was sworn in December, so 2021. And you remember this time was very crazy time. But one of the first things, top priority, was to look at these impact fees because we knew that we were behind in things like our road infrastructure and, even the parks that get paid out from impact fees and the things that we really needed based on those impacts. And so looking at them and getting a study done, finding out that it was 17 years that they had not been updated. Now, I'm older than you, but I can tell you I remember how much I was paying for things 17 years ago, and it certainly isn't the same as I'm paying today.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, there were discounts given. Now, in 2008, we went through a crisis. There was a housing crisis, and the local government rightfully stepped up and tried to make sure that we were continuing to have a stable housing market. And one of the things they did was they discounted some of those impact fees. Well, once we stabilized, those discounts really should have been done. It should have been based on where our entire value was, right? So that we could continue to keep up with the things that impact fees pay for.
Yeah.
So in 2022, the board did update our impact fees. Now, it is also something that we have to be really careful to fall under the state statute of impact fees. So we couldn't do it all in one fell swoop. We had to do it sort of in these segmented pieces. And there was a lot of pushback from the development community. Understandably, their interest is in making sure they're not paying more in impact fees. But, my statement to them, even then, even now, is your product's going to be better if we have all the right stuff to go with it.
Yeah. Is the idea then more density? Would that be that would be like, let's just get more people in, because we already have really small lot lines here.
Right.
There's not like we're going to fit any more in there. So does that mean more apartments or does that mean
do you mean overall?
Yeah,
overall. Sort of looking at the growth patterns and looking at Vision 2050 and what are the goals?
Because people are moving here regardless, right? And we need to put them somewhere and it needs to be affordable. So how do we fix that?
It's exactly. So yes, densifying areas that have the existing infrastructure is really your best bet. And I mean that in the sustainable, long-term investment way, right? So we know you can drive down 50 from west side all the way to east side. And how many sprawling, empty parking lots do you go past?
Yeah, there's tons.
How many empty big box stores that have packed up and moved on to another area, maybe a newer suburban, sprawling suburb.
Fashion Square Mall or something like that. Like that redevelopment is
right.
Great.
These are all places that already have existing infrastructure that we need to figure out how to make sure that it's easiest for private development interests to come in, see that, and think that's where I want to put my money because it's going to be cheaper. I'm going to have more return on investment. And then we're going to be able to live in a more sustainable way because that densification in our already populated areas goes up, and we're allowed to preserve those areas that we're using right now for our grazing lands, for our ag lands, for our recharge.
Sure.
Now, there's got to be a wide variety of inventory, right? You understand the housing market that we need things at every price point, and we can't get stuck in sort of that everything has to be one thing mode.
Okay.
And scarily, for a while, coming out of that 2008, there was just a lot of focus on high-end, single families.
Big box, mega mansions.
That's it. And we really need the full spectrum of inventory, right? So you can see examples sometimes in other urban areas of really cool things where people get like adorable ADUs put on their own lot, where they can have their retired parents come back, or let's say they have a young professional child that wants to come back, that it's right there in their property. It's not a lot split, right? Because a lot split would actually change it would be
zoning.
a more entangled zoning. But it allows a better population absorption, right? Big and small, right? Areas that we know would be a better fit for quads. It's so hard to get like a quad on a lot, right?
It is.
Yeah. And
I mean, I own a duplex in Soto, and like I get investors that reach out all the time, and they're like, "Where's the duplexes? Where's the quads? Where's the?" And I'm like, "They don't really exist. You kind of have to go pretty far out, or get something really old, meaning that there's been nothing new built in a very long time." That's right,
because it was hard to get done.
Yeah.
So my job, and it's a very clear mandate for me because I understand that we're growing, is to make spaces that aren't just one single type of space, right? That we look for those opportunities everywhere. And so having the ability to come in, put an ADU and allow a family member, or you have a piece of property that's really underutilized, making sure that we've got some flexibility into making that a quad. We've got a sprawling parking lot and you're a commercial, property owner and you're like, you know what, I think I want this to be a mixed use development with housing and retail. Yes.
Yeah, let's
yes,
do it.
please do that. I would love
Yeah.
that. Because then ultimately what the goal is that we then have the ability, because of our more stabilized tax base, to get better transportation options, right? So we've never had enough money and enough density areas, pockets to say, it's time for light rail.
No, not at all. And it's like so spread out. And that's what people are like, oh, you should run Sunrail east and west. I'm like, yeah, well, how many stops are you going to put? Because it's got to be pretty far out because of the sprawl. So I get that. I am curious. So there's, I think recently there was either the county or the city put out with the ADUs, going back to your comment about that, where it was like, hey, we have 5 approved ADUs if you do this.
That's us.
And yet I know Groveland did that and nobody did it. And so it was like, it sounded great, but nobody actually did it. Why aren't more people actually taking advantage of it?
Well, I'm going to hope that Groveland offered fewer opportunities than Orange County, right?
Okay.
So it's an Orange County plan. Now it has to be, you sort of have to fit into already certain categories, right?
Yeah.
You'd have to have a certain size lot. Your existing structure would probably need to be of a certain size and shape for you to be able to get that ADU. But we found that there were people who were stuck because they were like, I've got the space, I've got the yard, but I'm not going to go out and pay an architect to do this because that's going to be this huge chunk of money that I could have put into the actual dwelling itself.
Yeah.
And so if we could provide these prepackaged architectural plans and a path forward in their permit approvals, then we were hoping to be able to expedite those. And so you talk about the housing crisis, and we know that we hear more about the lower end.
Yeah.
But if we have inventory in the middle, and that missing middle is what those ADUs are aiming for.
Kind of fill it in. Yeah.
Exactly. And so we're hopeful. I mean, it literally just went through. We got the final approval, I guess, like 6 months ago or something on those. And they're lovely. I looked at the plans and
they're great. I think
lovely.
it's just, it's getting people to use them. I think that's the big thing. Like making awareness, making it an easy process.
Exactly.
I think the whole like pre-approved idea is a great idea, which leads me to my next question. So like developers and sort of like development, the mixed use places, like you said, hey, empty parking lot, they want to come in. One of the things that I've heard from developers is that Orange County is actually really hard to work in. And I'm like, well, why is that? And they're like, well, it seems a little bit complicated. And I'm like, is it that you're getting turned down or is it that it's complicated? And last thing I'll say before I dive into that. So I went to Nashville a couple weeks ago with the mayor and a bunch of people from just all the people in Orlando. It was really cool. And we got to hear from Nashville of like how their growth, and it was density. Like it was a lot of it was very close. But one of the things that they said that made it really, really easy was that developers thought it was easy and clear on what the county would and wouldn't allow.
Right.
And so they were like, hey, they took something, and I'm making the number up. There's like 180 pages down to like 30. And they said, hey, if you follow this 30-page code, we will approve it, rubber stamp it, and quick.
Right.
Now I hear. Now this is anecdotally, right? So you can tell me if
Well,
I'm wrong.
you were probably listening in on the meeting at Orlando where they said this. I mean,
Oh,
the
yeah,
mayor
yeah,
did
yeah.
say it. I mean, I was right there. He's like, Commissioner Wilson.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was like, oh, so I'm getting called out here. Okay. Because, the idea was trying to, really be there to try to continue to hold out a hand to make sure we can plan together.
So we can plan together. I think, and that's what we're all looking for.
Yeah.
And one of the other pieces is like, I'll let you talk here in a minute. I apologize, but the the cohesive nature between the city and the county, I think needs to be there. That was what Nashville saw was really successful. So how is that? How can we see a path forward here in Orlando similarly?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think so for people out here in especially District 1.
Yeah.
Reading in the newspaper about the annexation and whether or not this was going to create some huge, gap in relationship.
Oh, yeah.
We have existing joint planning agreements with every municipality in District 1.
Wow.
So there's an existing joint planning agreement with Winter Garden, with Windermere, with Oakland. I have frequent meetings with the city managers. So those go forward. The city of Orlando did not have an existing joint planning agreement, and especially one that spoke to the very large annexations that you saw coming forward that are now on deck.
Yep.
And so we're talking about areas that have very specific, what I would say are needs that the city is not capable right now of providing.
Is that like schools and roads, or what is it?
All the above.
Yeah.
All the above. So that's why when you think about that hearing that Orlando had, that they said, well, we're hearing from the developers that the county is not easy to work with. That's why they're coming to us. That's why the Orange County firefighters representative was there and said, we're concerned about how we're going to take care of this additional population, knowing that there hasn't been planning, right? We haven't sat down as a cohesive municipal group.
Yeah.
And so that is going to be coming because the state statute requires that to happen as part of our challenge to the annexation. But to the point of that particular case, you're talking about a land mass that will, it's really going to
60% more land space to the
It's
city.
going to dwarf what the city is currently. So the city of Orlando is beautiful. It's wonderful. My colleagues that sit on that board, amazing. I have a great relationship with them. But there is no environmental protection division at the city of Orlando. They don't have an animal shelter.
Do they have that in Winter Garden, like an EPA?
No. Orange County's Environmental Protection Division is sort of the county's Environmental Protection Division.
Okay.
Which, and there's something that I noticed very early on in my tenure, and maybe even sort of got a heads up about it before I came into office, was that a workaround for anybody that wants to put something in an environmentally sensitive land, build there, and potentially fill in a wetland, is to remove that land from the county's oversight. And so because the cities, the municipal areas, default to state law, they say, no, the state takes care of that. But really the analysis for what the entire region and some of the drainage patterns and overall ecosystems, it's not the same analysis that we do within our Environmental Protection Division. Since I got into office in 2020, the environmental protection oversight, it's gotten even better. And you can see why. We think about the flooding that's happening right now across the county, largely in areas where something went over a wetland. It went into a riverbed, it was built over a wetland, and then, we have a storm and people wonder why there's standing water.
Is that like Horizon West?
Well, Horizon West is a very interesting topographical area because it actually has some of the highest, most sandy soils. So that's why you see those rib sites, those funky looking caterpillars that you see. Those are rapid infiltration basins. And so those are actually used for water recharge as it goes back into the aquifer. And those are usually in areas that have really good permeable soil.
Yeah.
But there are areas that, if you look sort of at the water atlas for Orange County, you can see exactly where you would predict flooding because you can see where the water travels down. So essentially that Reams Lake area, you can see the water coming from there to Reedy Creek, which then goes to Shingle Creek, which then goes to the Kissimmee River, which then goes on out to the Everglades. So you're talking about like water that is moving, not just because it's low lying and pooling. And anytime that a river or, a series of lakes that are connected by tributaries or canals gets interrupted by a road or a neighborhood, it's going to try to find a way.
Yeah.
It's going to try to find a way. And we can try to fight Mother Nature. She's going to win. And it's going to be a lot easier and cheaper for us if we work with her.
Sure.
And if we look ahead of time and say, hey, let's do a good analysis of what the wetland looks like here and make sure we're building around it. And so Orange County did a full comprehensive wetland assessment over the last couple of years, and then we adopted a brand new wetland protection ordinance effective June 1st, 2024. So I know there's a lot of speculation that huge annexation push was happening to try to beat the clock, if you will, on the annexation ballot measure.
Oh, yeah.
But I also think that we have to take a close look at whether or not the regulatory obligations that anybody who's going to be coming in and bringing fill dirt or building a neighborhood somewhere that is currently wet, are they working around something? And it's a fair question to ask. It's a fair thing, I think, for county residents to say, hey, county representative, can you make sure that if the city annexes that they're doing the same thing? So, the annexation piece for, the tax base no one's losing tears over that, right? Because really right now, the tax valuation has been as grazing land, which is sort of the lowest piece.
Yeah, it's cheap. Yeah.
So it's really about what are the impacts going to be if we can't assess and build in all the things we know we need if we're doubling, tripling, quadrupling the sort of urban core of the county.
What would you say to people? So speaking of the ballot measure, it's confusing. And honestly, I hate how these ballot measures are actually written up. I wish they were more clear because it would be really cool to be able to just say like, hey, do you agree that annexation should happen? Yes or no? And like, if people don't know what that is, because the way that it's written, it's very confusing. So I feel like unpack that for people, because I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, I
in
think
regards to
this is a great opportunity because the timing is everything.
Sure. And so I feel like, so some people on one side are saying, hey, annexation is keeping property rights in the hands of the people, because if not, the county gets to decide if you annex or not. You guys are thinking, well, hey, listen, I don't care. Like, so fill that second part in for me.
Okay, so both the annexation and the rural boundary ballot measure, they're procedural, which means that it doesn't prevent anything, right? Nobody loses any property rights. There's no property rights at risk. What it does is it adds a layer of protection in that joint planning. So essentially, if there's an annexation outside that urban service area, that the requirement is that the county and the city come together with a joint planning agreement. And that is a win-win-win, right? So to me, anybody that may oppose that, I would like to know what it is. Maybe they misunderstand it, because I do think that we want those joint planning agreements to happen like everywhere.
Between
right?
the city and the county.
Yes, exactly. There are just services that the county's always going to have that a municipal government may not ever have, right? I mean, we have one animal shelter. We have one medical examiner's office. We have these are things the county's always going to have.
Yeah.
And so even though we can grow municipal departments, and certainly municipalities have the ability to grow and add departments, but having that joint planning adds a layer of coordination that should make everyone feel safer about, I would say, those basic infrastructure issues, the concerns about flooding, the concerns about school overcrowding, the concerns about clean air, clean water. And so you're talking about some really basic planning principles that we feel like are, I think it's reasonable. I think people can decide when they get to the ballot, but it is a procedural measure. The rural boundary charter measure is actually what it does is it makes the county have a super majority. Yeah. So it's procedural. There's no difference in property rights. It doesn't do anything like that. It doesn't take anything outside the urban service area out of bounds for development. But the thing I was telling you when we first started talking, which was that I am one vote of 7.
Sure.
And if my district is made up of rural and ag lands, that I can have hundreds of thousands of acres, but only like 3 people come in and speak at the mic during a public hearing. But they deserve the same. They deserve the same protections anybody else would get from our comprehensive plan and our charter. Yeah. So the idea of being able to sort of, really change the entire landscape of a rural area with a slim margin vote, which is what happens again and again and again, is something that our residents have been so frustrated with. Our rural residents on the east and the west have come forward and said, we don't understand why our representatives can get shot down so easily. I mean, this was a split vote. We only missed by 1. Yeah. And so what it does is the threshold goes up. And I think that's once again, it's not that it doesn't prohibit anybody from being able to utilize their land.
But if they want to annex into, say, a Coe or a Popka or anything outside of the county into a city, they need a super majority then to get it.
Well, so the annexation is a separate. So those are 2 different ballot measures. Okay. And listen, this is the other thing I want to say for anybody that's tuning in. The League of Women Voters has a great nonpartisan guide. Yeah. So there'll be a breakdown of these.
Sweet.
They are both procedural votes. And I will tell you that one of the things that was very important to the county commission for the ballot measures that we were going to take up is that we didn't want to take up anything that could be struck down by a state law, really quickly because of something that we know they've struck down before like or
rent
preempted.
Control, right? Yeah. Right. Rent control is like everybody's like, yeah, I voted. I think we approved it, right?
Oh, it was overwhelmingly.
But it's against the state constitution.
Well,
right?
So no, it was actually preempted. This is so interesting because I do think this is something that you hear. It's a misconception. It was never actually struck down by a court. It was a preemption. They passed a law that targeted that specific language. So the Live Local Act, which is the act that you also probably know from people being able to switch commercial properties and industrial properties into residential low
affordable
housing. Within that piece of legislation was a provision to prevent any rent control measures from any local governments. So it was passed about the same time that it was going to the ballot, and it stayed on the ballot. And of course, we knew there were already many pieces of the state statute that really, it was going to be a very limited, I think, relief, but we still needed to offer some relief because coming out of COVID, where all these things were paused, people were coming out and then they were seeing doubles and triples and quadruples of their
went up like crazy.
Yeah, so people were really, it was just a kind of a spiral. And
thankfully they've kind of chilled out.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And it just took some time to get things that were coming into inventory built and onto the market. It took time for people to be able to have some time to go back and talk to landlords. It took time for even some of our smaller landlords to get back in there and do what they needed to do in reinvestment, and they've stabilized. So, and we did open up and this was like 2022 or 23, a whole new division that is dedicated to sort of helping landlords and tenants with navigating all the state laws and the local ordinances, because what we heard more than just wanting to preempt was we don't know what our rights are, and they're telling me that I was paying $400, now it's going to be $1,000 by Monday. Mm-hmm. And so, just trying to help make sure that resources were available for, really everybody. But it was interesting because in that first year, we definitely had as much engagement with smaller mom and pop landlords as we did because they were like, we don't want to.
I don't understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So we just, everybody has the ability that way to get the resources and make sure that they're following state law and making sure that they can stay in business.
So when you say preemptive, whether that's the 2 on the ballot or the rent control, that was more so just like letting people know, hey, I'm pushing this on the ballot. You guys go learn more about this. This is important. Or what else do you mean by preemptive?
Well, no. So when I say preemption, it's a state does something that sort of pulls the rug out from underneath a local government, right? So, like probably the most famous ones in the state were the sunscreen. When down in the Keys, they tried to enact a local ordinance to prevent the type of sunscreen that bleaches coral. Oh. And so you're talking about something that really is such a local issue, but the sunscreen lobby, I guess, is big and powerful. I don't know, but next thing we know,
we sell a lot of it here.
Yeah, right. But next thing we know, the state preempted that and said, "Sorry, Keys, you don't get to make that decision." So that's when the state comes in and says, "Hey, at the state law level, we are enacting a law that will prevent the local government from doing that." So local, America was founded on local control. Yeah. So this idea of understanding sort of what the needs of a community are, it's, to me, it's a very powerful right. And so I hate it to see that the state doing that. It used to be that a preemption sort of built a floor and then the local could go up from there. Like if it was something in the environmental world or some kind of a safety net of some kind. But nowadays it seems very reflexive when the local community is looking at something. So I think another example of this would be the Split Oak Forest, which, obviously we're still kind of struggling to see what's going to happen with Split Oak Forest. Sure. But
for people that don't know, what's going on over there?
So Split Oak Forest is a beautiful conservation land that was purchased with taxpayer money. Orange County and Osceola County leaders at the time, and you're talking about late 80s, early 90s, got together and said, we need to tuck away lands. And actually part of it was mitigation for the I-Drive corridor and the convention center. And so it would be mitigation land protected in perpetuity. And then the state came in as sort of the holder of the trust. So Florida Communities Trust held that in perpetuity. Try to say that with a straight face, in perpetuity for generations. And
is that the same with all conservation mitigation? Is it supposed to be for generations, or is this like a until you decide to move it kind of thing?
Well, it's interesting because like any other agreement, and being in real estate, that agreements can be written and tailor-made for who the parties involved.
Sure, yeah.
And so there's always a way to undo an agreement. And I think in this case, unfortunately, what was utilized to undo, or they are attempting to continue to undo, was something that was put into place that we need to have put in place. They're using a linear facilities statute in order to break into that conservation land. And linear facilities is actually something that was put into place for things like your power lines. We know that power lines are going to go across conservation land,
course, yeah.
Right? There's going to be
gotta get for one way or the other.
That's right.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you'll see, the fire lines or drainage ditches. They're usually things that are really necessary in order to, continue functioning on one side of a conservation area or another. Is a toll road something necessary to function on one side or the other? Severing 160 acres, appropriate for a, what they're calling a linear facility or utilities? I would say no. I think it's a manipulation, but it was sort of an untested piece of legislation that they're using. So unless somebody fights it.
Yeah, I was gonna say who makes the decision on what's necessary or not, right? Like, because if you're sitting in traffic all day, you're like, well, toll road is necessary, but if you're like, oh well, no, I want to keep it as conservation land, then it's not necessary. So it's kind of like a voter decision at that point.
Well, exactly right. Which is why in 2020, and I mean, if you rewind to 2016, 2017, when they first started looking at that expressway addition. there really wasn't a justification even in the amount of traffic, and there was a really clear path to get around the conservation land. What we understood when we got into the study that was done by the Expressway Authority was that it was just the most expensive way to do it was to go around.
Sure.
That it was cheaper because if you know the tragedy of the commons, you know that our shared land is going to be cheaper if we're like, we'll just take a little bit of it and you can have the rest of it. Oh, you know what we'll do? We'll get you a little bit of land up there and we'll just swap it out. Well, to mitigate with mitigation for mitigation, it's a shell game.
Yeah.
And so what they, essentially tried to do was say, we're just going to shave off this piece for it because it was going to be too expensive to purchase the properties that required them to go around.
That is
now,
that Central Florida Exchange?
Expressway Authority.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So fast forward, here we are 2024, that has really built up around there.
A lot.
And so, now they're like, oh, there is no feasible alternative. And I'm like, but you created that circumstance where there's no feasible alternative, by not actually acquiring the property you needed when it was necessary or when you deemed it necessary.
So what's the next step? Like, what do we do to get out of that?
Well, so, Orange County voters weighed in 2020, and it was literally record-breaking numbers. So the two ballot measures in 2020 that were protective for our environment, and one was when we first pushed it forward, it was really specifically for the Wekiva River and the Econolachi. And so it was interesting what happened once it got to the Charter Review Commission, that they felt very strongly that it should apply to all the waterways in Orange County, that we needed an additional protective measure for all the waterways in Orange County. That went on the ballot in 2020, and the Split Oak, protecting Split Oak, went on the ballot. They came in at between 86% approval and 89, something like unheard of. And it was on the third page with a whole bunch of other, like this year, right?
Yeah.
There's so much there.
Many.
And I thought, I don't know if anyone's going to find these ballot measures. And not only did they find them, but it, was record breaking in the level of approval that Orange County residents, you talk about a voter mandate, right? The voters said loud and clear, you protect my water.
Yeah.
You protect my conservation land. You better have a good reason to come in and take that. So, Split Oak remains unresolved. But once again, following the 2020 vote on the right to clean water, the state passed another pretty broad bill about, some other waterway cleanups. And there's a one-sentence preemption in that bill that basically says, and no local governments, may enact any, and then basically used our language.
Oh, wow.
So it was preempted. So it wasn't, I know that you'll hear, well, it's costly for the taxpayers because, go to the courts. And no, it goes to a lobbyist who then walks around Tallahassee and says, hey, can you put this line in the amendment that will preempt that so that if they try to enforce it, we can challenge it.
Got it. So that's why you're saying it's up in the air at this point, because it's, even though they voted for it, there's this preemption where it's probably going to happen.
Well, Split Oak is a different one too, because Orange County did that ballot measure, Osceola County didn't. And so even though they entered into a joint agreement for a piece of conservation land, they are, essentially Osceola's argument right now is that the road wholly impacts only Osceola lands. And Orange County continues to maintain that, much like a marriage, that when you decide to jointly own property, both parties need to agree. And if you read the document, which I always default to those original agreements, they say all parties to the agreement must agree to any modifications. And so if one of those parties came in at, 86% of the voting public to not modify the agreement, to me, that is a loud and clear voter mandate. And I think it undermines public trust if we go around that and look for loopholes and continue to try to find loopholes. Go around. Figure out how to go around. If my feeling about it is that when the development that has been approved since this controversy bubbled up in 2017, 2018, if they had started really looking for an alternate route right then, this would not even be an issue anymore. But they continue to double down on the fact that they want that land because it is in their minds, the cheapest way to go.
Interesting. So, now, I know, tell me if I'm wrong. I'm just thinking about other projects that have just finished up, and the Wekiva Parkway extension was one of them, and they did a brilliant, beautiful job. I think there was extra laws that were into place. So and they won awards.
Yeah. Commissioner Constantine up there is somebody who I talk to all the time about this, because he's somebody that navigated that and he had been at the state. So he understood sort of the implication of where state, can come in and tinker with things. And then he is, was on the Expressway Authority, and I actually sit with him on MetroPlan. And yes, his thoughts about Split Oak were, if this is going to happen, can we follow this model? Can we make sure it's elevated? Can we follow sort of the pattern that we did in the Wekiva area? I will tell you, as somebody who really just firmly believes that there are areas that just shouldn't have roads in them, no, I don't think it's okay. Now, we've been in Florida long enough to know that road building is a thing.
Yeah.
And, I may ultimately be dragged out of Split Oak Forest, but I think until the day that the bulldozers roll in, I know that I'm committed, and other people who really care about this issue are committed to saying, look, it's a public trust issue, right? These were conservation lands that were purchased by these counties and should be held in perpetuity as conservation land, not as a cut through.
Yeah, right.
The Wekiva Parkway, not involved in it, but I know that there continues to be a lot of dead wildlife because of it. There's still big consequences, right? You can't do controlled burns the way that you need to. So there's still, even though it is I think a good model for how to try to go up and over
wetlands and all that stuff. Yeah,
ecologically sensitive lands. It's still a
it's
highway.
Not perfect.
It is a highway, right? You're talking about light and noise and fumes, and it is a highway, and there should be areas in our world that are just off limits to that kind of development.
Yeah, that's fair. Can we move on?
Oh, yeah.
I love it. I could geek out on development like literally all day, every day. So it's totally right.
I'm your girl.
So obviously there's a election coming up, and we talked about 21 days away. You had a kind of a wild election night a couple months. Was it a couple months ago now?
It was August.
I think it was 2 votes. It was so if anybody, we're not in an off-cycle election, so we know we're gonna have a good turnout. But off-cycle elections are wild to me because I think we have something like 15% turnout. It's really bad.
It was 16%. It was awful.
Yeah, it's not awesome, and it's sad, but at the same time, I get it. So you guys had on the night, I think there was a 2-vote difference, and then it ended up becoming a 5-vote difference, but then forced a runoff.
Let me tell you, it was a roller coaster that I could not get off of.
Yeah.
When I left, I closed the polling place in downtown Windermere, and when I closed the polling place, I heard from, it was, I think, somebody that was at the canvassing board, and they said, "Oh, you're 1,300 up. It would be hard for him to move past this at this point." And then the next call I got was actually from a reporter who said, "You're 27 down." And then the next call I got was from the aide of another commissioner who said, "I'm watching this whole thing and I'm refreshing as fast as I can, and you're 5, five was where we were sitting for a long time." And then, of course, because you have mail-in ballots, you have early vote and then day of vote, but you also have a number of ballots that come in either from military overseas, or people have the whole day of election day to cure their mail-in ballot if there's something wrong. And so everybody was scrambling to make sure that if they had mail-in ballots out there, that people were curing them. But you don't know if they voted for you or not.
Sure,
and it's a nonpartisan race. But you just, for the sake of democracy, we sent out, I had volunteers, hey, if you know where this is, will you just go tap on their door and say, can you update your signature? Because people should have their ballot counted.
Yeah.
And if they bubbled in all the right things, but then for some reason, did something wonky, like signed their maiden name or had, added an MD at the end or something like that, that's enough to make a mismatch.
Wow.
And so making sure they have the opportunity to go fix that, they have to do it in that time period. So everybody was scrambling to do that. And at the end of that, it was 2. It was 2 between us. And so the decision at that point is, do I ask for a manual recount? This could go on. It could be illegal. Or do we just kind of pick up and go to the next place? And so, if you followed that election cycle, you'll know that there was a write-in. A friend of my opponent didn't ever really have any intention of running a actual campaign, right? There was no actual campaigning going on, but just did it as some kind of, I don't really even know, maybe a distraction, maybe some... I don't know. I know that he's a supporter of my opponent, but he was a huge critic of the mayor and of my entire board and how we went through COVID protocols. He just absolutely disagreed with the way that we handle COVID. I will tell you, as an elected that walked into that, I walked into shutdown. Right? As an elected, brand new, never been in a political seat before. It was a nightmare, right? We were trying to figure out how to keep people alive. Yeah. It was like every day. It was
very unknown.
It was unknown, and just trying to be as cautious and protective as possible of the public health. So, if you'd told me back then that we would have people pushing through the front, and protest over mask mandates and people calling, we got cussed down at different events I would have been like, nah, what? Nah. But that's what happened.
Sure.
And so this was somebody that evidently, hooked up with my opponent like a couple years ago on his podcast. And so they've been friends, and he jumped in as a writing candidate, but because he had a name that was recognizable enough to a certain group of people that there were like exactly 26 people who wrote his name in.
Interesting.
So those 26 votes prevented either one of us from getting the 50% plus one, which is what you would need to move on to win.
So if you think about when people think my vote doesn't matter, I'm not going to show up today.
Oh my gosh.
It matters so much. And I feel like I would love to get part of it. I think
every vote, every time. And I love here's the thing I love. And I will tell you this as somebody that like really struggled that night and the next day and the day after that, because I've worked just so hard in these last 4 years. And I feel like I've like given everything and sacrificed so much to make sure that I was serving my community. And I was like, wow, they don't know how hard I'm working for them if it was this close.
Yeah.
So it felt really like hard for me, personally. But on a political level, I had more people reach out and go, we were those two.
Oh,
people that I know.
Like one couple or something like that shows up.
Yes, I had a friend that said, my daughter is on a study abroad in Europe. And I was like, you better get your ballot back in the mail by this date. And if you don't, you FedEx it, we'll get it back in. Yeah. And he was like, those were your two, So it was like, that really resonated with people, which then gives me such hope that people will understand how important it is. You give up control of so many things if you don't show up.
That's right. I agree. I'm like we in our pre-show here. I was telling you like whatever side you're on is the side you're on, but like exercise your vote because it's all we have. And then it's the
root for democracy.
That's right. And those people that don't show up are they going to be the same people that complain about something happening over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years? It's wild. So
I actually did the math.
Okay.
Like I figured out because I've done like something like over 500 now community meetings. I've done like over 70 just town hall kind of style that weren't based on something. Yeah. I've done something like 50, events that were specified, like a helmet fitting or whatever. I did the math and realized that even the people who I had touched personally at those, if they had shown up, I would have won decisively.
Oh, of course. Yeah, of course. And they always assume the next guy's going to show up or the next gal's going to show up. That's probably what it is, right?
Yeah. Or that I heard many times like, oh my God, I can't believe how close that was. I just thought it would be, I'm like,
it's wild. I've got 2 questions for you and then we'll wrap up or anything else you want to share. So I feel like you're 1 term so far, and what do you feel like you've done over the past term that you're really proud of?
There's a lot of things local, like the fact that Windermere High School students get to play on their stadium for the first time. And that was such a big deal because we had to fight for that school back before when I was just a PTA mom.
Oh, I remember.
We fought for that school to be put there. And then to get their stadium, like you think about the local things like those kind of, I don't know if that ever would have happened. But on a larger, like a macro scale, I would say changing the course of our development pattern and the work that we put into updating the environmental protection ordinances like the wetland code, because that was updated for the first time in 30 years, effective June 1st, 2024. And I can't be any more proud of anything than I am of that. Updating our tree code, it was even older than our wetland code. And so that's why we would see sometimes the loss of heritage trees on these sites that now have to be protected. That also just went into effect though. And then, conservation land. We had Green Place it was something that was on the books forever, but we had no money going into it. So being able to earmark $100 million in order to actually purchase land, and that is something that you talk about, something that's bondable because we know land is very valuable. Yeah. And to be able to, I want to put a sign up on some of them saying, coming soon, nothing.
This will remain vacant
That's
forever.
right. This will be as wooded and beautiful and shady as it is right now. So, over 1,000 acres. We've had, even just in the last 6 months, in every single agenda cycle, we've had Green Place conservation parcels here in District 1, 2 of them there on Reams Road. Now, to some extent, it feels a little too late because we're still suffering with some of the impacts of the wetland loss there. But you know what? We're like, wherever I can grab now.
Sure.
And make sure that we're making those connections. So I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of the investment that we've made in our social services partnerships out in the community. So something like $400 million that we've put into, from Head Start to our youth programs to, the different educational opportunities for even our seniors in our community centers. And so these were, dollars that sometimes were earmarked but not going out, right? So then they just get absorbed or, pushed into some other bureaucratic envelope. Actually seeing them go out to these partners and seeing them actually in the community, very proud of that. And I feel like the things that are happening right now in the arts community, knowing that the state has sort of pulled back on funding for arts, that if the county hadn't stepped up and started grabbing back some of that money from TDT and putting it into the arts community, that we would be in a world of hurt in the arts community here in Central Florida. And we're so fortunate. We have so much talent and we have so much beauty. And I'm like, that takes money.
Yeah, we have to support those people. And I think that, it's sad to see whether it's going back to earlier in the conversation, it's like, these firefighters, if you don't train them up and treat them right and pay them right, like that's right. Another thing. Right. And so actually I guess I have a couple more questions. So let's talk like the whole teacher, like we've got crazy growth with new schools. I live in Horizon West. There was like 4 or 5 new schools in the past 3 years, like insane. And yet like we're having trouble getting like bus drivers because they say that we're not paying them enough, but then you've got teachers, which is a national issue.
It's a national issue. We've got to treat them better.
We have to treat them better. How do we make sure that we attract and retain talent long-term here in Orange County?
No, I think it's all the things, right? Because I think even though something like, our teachers, that is not necessarily under my purview, but one of the things that is to make sure that if we, we talk about that sort of the broad spectrum of housing options, the broad spectrum, the other pieces of affordability that are there, right? And that includes even making sure that when we're looking for school siting and working with OCPS on that, and something that Horizon West, I think, should be the model of is how can we make sure that anybody who wants to get to school in a way besides a single rider vehicle can do that.
Sure.
If we can get people walking and biking, we also get a health benefit. We get them off the road. We don't have to hire extra bus drivers and we get a health benefit, but we have to do that safely. So that's, to me, a huge priority, but that's something that you invest in, right? You get multi-use, big, huge, wide multi-use pass and you make sure they connect and that they connect again. And that we provide, adequate, I would say even sort of the health safety pieces of that, right? Coming out and doing the helmet fittings and so that people want to do it. But our firefighters in particular, it's something that really does sort of break my heart because they a lot of times are leaving solely for a salary piece.
Sure, yeah. Of course.
And so,
if I'm going to put my life in the line, I want to be paid for it.
That's exactly right. And so, having the conversation with the union and trying to get to what's going to take to be able to retain for career. We want career.
Yeah.
We want people to be able to be here and grow
and
into that. Yeah, exactly. And part of it is, yes, how affordable is it to live here? And then does our salary match that? And so, hopefully setting those standards higher, which we are. We just passed a budget that for the first time will increase the MSTU for our firefighters, which means that we're hopefully going to see, possibly better retention. We actually attract quite a few, and then we just need to figure out how to retain them. And so making sure that they're heard.
That's kind of like Orlando's story. I feel like, unfortunately, we attract, UCF has like 60-something thousand kids. Yeah. We're attracting kids and training them up and sending them out. I would love to see Orlando and Orange County, Central Florida in general, like be a place where we can attract, retain, and grow, and then thrive as a community. So
absolutely. Well, so one of the things that we've recently started investing in, and it's something that I think is such a cool idea, to your point, that diversification of economic drivers, right?
Have to.
And so we have these small business incubators and incubators for high tech type corridors, because once you get one, then you kind of get that ecosystem, right? And then you can sort building off of those. And so the hope is to see sort of those to, cycle out. We have UCF here is such a treasure and a gem. Yeah. And so I'm hopeful that, we've put in some money there for those incubator programs. And I'm hoping the next 5-10 years, we start to see even more development in that direction and adding some of those high tech type jobs.
Yeah, it's interesting to see like Neo City. I know over in Lake Nona, they've got Lead Up. There's a lot of different I think that stuff's great. And pouring back into them, making sure that they stick around.
That's right.
So last thing I'll ask you then is, so what's Nicole Wilson for? It sounds like you're for some environmental protection. That sounds easy. I think it's like a no-brainer. What else are you for Orange County?
Oh my gosh. So transparency is everything for me. Honesty, integrity. I am a rules follower to a T. And so I'm a trained attorney, but I went back late in life. And I had 3 kids. And everyone was like, you're doing what? but I sort of knew it was the direction I wanted to go in, and I really felt strongly about justice and about the equal opportunity for justice in our system. And I mean that like the very broadest sense, right? So I love, the idea that I get to protect due process even in my job now.
Sure.
And anybody who comes through any process at the county deserves equal treatment as anybody else that comes through any process at the county. So I'm for, making sure that equitable treatment, the justice, and it really being able to say that when we operate as a county, as a government, that we're doing it in a way that has the public's best interest, but that is also accessible and open to the public. I felt like as a citizen for years and years before I ran for office that I was locked out. That I would stand up there and ask, repeatedly, let's go all the way back right to Windermere High School, like, hey, stop shooting this down. These are your kids. Yeah. Gosh,
West Orange was overpopulated to begin with.
My freshman in high school that year was like, we put her little mile counter on, and she was putting in like 5 miles a day with a cello on her back because she was going back and forth from the 9th grade center. And, still great teachers. They were doing it, right? The schools were making it work. Yeah. But to see a county commissioner at that time who literally went to West Orange High School, and he was the deciding vote, no vote, just felt to me like such a disconnect. And it continues to be, continued to be that disconnect. And then sort of the final straw for me before I ran was split oak vote, where I stood there and I listened to scientists, I listened to legal scholars, I listened to the person who helped write the legislation for Florida Communities Trust, who came over from Stetson to speak that day. And the county commission just moved on forward with approving the route through Split Oak Forest. And I was like, I got to give it a try. I have to do something.
That's amazing. 21 days in county. Gonna wake up. Nicole, thanks for coming out.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate this. It's been great.
If you made it all the way to the end of this interview, you obviously care about Orlando, so hit the subscribe button as we're putting out interviews with our local leaders and some cool things around real estate, theme parks, and living in Orlando every single week. We'll see you guys on the next episode.